Welcome back to another week. We are going to pick up Chapter 4 and then come back to Chapter 3 this week. So this lecture refers to Chapter 4, but only the first two sections, sections 4.1 and 4.2. I jumped ahead to a part of Chapter 4 because we have used the term society in the definition of sociology. Another reason is that one of the themes we will discuss throughout the semester is social change. I want to start that discussion by introducing the macro level of change, the change in types of societies. Again, we have a list of learning objectives, and I think you'll see that this particular section deals both with societies and with social change. We'll also use our theoretical perspectives, which we learned about last week, to understand the changes in the types of societies. I show in this slide a review of the definition of sociology that we've been working with. Groups and societies affect our behavior. So what is a society? It is a group of interacting persons, which doesn't tell us very much. We could also say a group of people who live in a definable community and share the same culture, which is on page 75 of the textbook. This is another reason to introduce societies this week. The second lecture this week is about culture, so it seems that there will be a link between the two, between societies and culture. Culture is the way of living that distinguishes one group from another. We will go into more detail about culture in Chapter 3 in the next lecture. I've actually divided Chapter 3 into 2 lectures. An important social fact and driving social force for the type of society and its culture is technology. Technology is simply the knowledge and development of tools and other devices to perform tasks needed in everyday life. We will see that the type of societies changed as technology changed, as people introduced new ideas and tools to help them to survive. For this brief introduction, we can divide the types of societies into 3 categories: pre-industrial, industrial, and now the post-industrial. Here's a list of the various pre-industrial societies, ranging across time from at least 20,000 years ago into even today into the modern age. They are hunting and gathering, pastoral, horticultural, agricultural, and feudal. Obviously, there are a few hunting and gathering societies remaining in isolated areas like the Amazon River Basin of South America, but even those are quickly being overcome by industrial corporations. And there are agricultural areas, but these are usually interlinked with the rest of the world today. Hunting and gathering societies were the first type of societies. These were nomadic groups of people who lived off the existing resources in their environment. Their technology at best would be sharp objects to assist them in survival, killing animals, fish, using the skins for warmth, eating animals and plants to survive. One important point is that they existed as groups of people, not alone. These groups were kinship-based and later larger tribes. 2 important technological changes allowed these groups of people to spread from Eastern Africa into Asia, the Americas, Europe, and the rest of the world. This was the development of fire for warmth and cooking, as well as the development of sharp objects to kill animals, as opposed to eating what other predators had left behind. As the groups continued, technology included fish hooks and spears, as well as needles for sewing clothing for warmth. These societies were at first egalitarian, meaning pretty much everybody was equal in the roles played for the quest for survival. Division of labor by gender developed as the groups were able to lessen the emphasis on survival and protect the woman's childbearing abilities. The next transition, and remember these stages are all processes, they don't happen one day. It happens over a period of time. But the next transition involved the domestication of animals and the ability to grow and cultivate plants. One group of people continued their nomadic way of life, herding animals. The difference between these people and the earlier hunting-gathering is that their movement is more patterned, following a cycle of movement, finding food for the animals, who are their food, stopping briefly at mostly established places. Because of their established pattern, they might trade with other groups or the permanent settlements they passed. Again, the social pattern was kinship or tribal, usually with an established head of the group. We see a wonderful example of this in the movie Lawrence of Arabia, where the British established relations with the Arab tribes in World War I. Horticultural societies were the permanent settlements where people grew plants and raised animals. However, all work was done by humans. They were small groups, kinship-oriented, but the beginnings of the agricultural societies and the trade and barter systems that would slowly encircle the world, the earliest beginnings of globalization. What we are seeing in each group or type of society is that those in the society identify with each other. We are one group of people, and, quote, they are strangers from another group, or strangers passing through if they are trading and bartering. As technology begins to develop, tools are available for farming, and animals are domesticated to help in that work, for example, by pulling the plow. The settlements become larger, and some specialization of labor develops. For example, the support system for the farmers, for the trade and barter peoples passing through. Surpluses become even larger, more than the settlement can eat, so trade expands, and those who produce the most are the wealthiest in the society, creating the beginning of social hierarchy based on wealth. The roles of women and men become more divided, based on the relationship to a plot of land which produces both food and wealth. Labor is needed for the farm. Women supply the children who become the labor. This agricultural society begins to develop an even more specialized division of labor. There is a need for security, so a class of warriors or knights develop, pledging allegiance to a person, the lord, the bishop, the king, the pope. Fiefdoms develop, where the lowest level, the peasants, are allowed to live and farm under the protection of vassals who are under a lord. Power was based on family lines, usually the male line of the family. The role of women was usually to provide the male heir and children for labor. The feudal system was underlined by a value system from an institution which needed protection and in return provided values and identity. Usually religious organizations like the Roman Catholic Church in Europe, the scholars and philosophers in China. In the 15th century, a technological invention, the printing press, opened knowledge and learning to the common people. First the Bible, and then other knowledge which would encourage changing mindsets, the Protestant Reformation, and then the Age of Enlightenment, bringing a different way of thinking, one called science. This science would replace animal and human labor with machine labor, steam engines and electricity, for example. These two technological inventions changed the lives of people in areas of Europe and the United States, eventually to most of the rest of the world. As we talked about earlier, work was done in factories, providing material goods to people who used to make their own goods. As we discussed in the history of sociology, life totally changed, from farms with large families to urban areas where children became a burden rather than an asset. Governments changed, people changed. The economic system called capitalism became the most practiced. The Catholic Church, which had been so important for 1,000 years in Europe, moved into the background. These enormous changes were referred to as modernization, resulting from the Industrial Revolution. In the late 1900s, less than 50 years ago, at least in my lifetime, technological changes of another kind began to move into the general public. Microchips brought another revolution, this time an information or digital revolution. Communication changed, the way we work changed. Where the technological innovations will lead us is hard to say. The economy is now a global assembly line with parts of goods made in one country, assembled in another, distributed worldwide. We are just beginning to see what this means for the many institutions of our social world. It is both an exciting time as well as a frightening time. Sociologists looking at these changes give us some interesting perspectives on social change. Of course, many of these early theorists only saw the Industrial Revolution. Durkheim, who was interested in how the parts of society work together and how these parts influenced behavior. He described pre-industrial societies as more cohesive, with a form of tighter social cohesion he called mechanical cohesion. The ties were more emotional, survival and dependence on each other. Then the Industrial Revolution brought changes. People were different, coming to the urban areas from many different places, doing different things, forming a different type of social cohesion, one based on interdependence of their differences, which Durkheim called organic solidarity. Durkheim also saw that these changes did not happen overnight, but throughout a period of time, often resulting in confusion and uncertainty as to how to act or interact. He called this anomie, which we saw in his explanation of the different types of suicide. Anomie is a French word from the French Revolution, meaning, quote, without norms or laws, a time of confusion and uncertainty. When people are afraid, uncertain, they often look for someone who can bring a feeling of certainty. In the French Revolution, it was Napoleon. Later, in the Great Depression of Germany, it was Hitler. Our discussion of anomic suicide was tied to this idea. How Durkheim would explain today is probably about the same. We are seeing another transition period of time which is causing a lot of uncertainty and weaker norms, that we see more conflict, and what will happen in the future is hard to tell, but it is a period of time which needs our understanding of the less certain ties that bind a society together. Karl Marx, another conflict theorist, saw these changes as totally based on the type of economic system, that each system had an elite and the workers who were controlled by the elite. In the capitalist economy, Marx and others argued for the workers to identify with each other, what he called class consciousness, rather than identifying with the elite, which he called false consciousness. The confusion in the information age seems to be around even greater economic inequality, often based on access to education. But interestingly enough, this type of economy has increased the inequality. We will talk a little bit more about this economic inequality when we look at later chapters on social stratification. Weber's interpretation of how and why change occurs is more aligned with the symbolic interactionist perspective. He looks at the effect on our perceptions and interactions. He saw ideas as the basis of social change, that as ideas changed, so did our behaviors and interactions. For example, he saw the change in religious ideas of the Protestant Reformation leading to changes in behaviors and interactions. He called this change, quote, rationalization, that people became more rational, meaning efficient, depending on reason rather than traditional beliefs. Weber then described changes in the macro level, institutions, as they developed bureaucracies, a rational organizational framework wherein people worked. Weber warned that this rationalization can become irrational. Just think of the local government agencies, like a visit to the Department of Motor Vehicles. It is certainly an example of rationality that has become irrational. We will see this idea of social change as we continue through the semester. We will now look at Chapter 3, which is Culture, the Way of Life in a Society. Keep in mind this idea of social change, as we will return to it in many following chapters. In Unit 3, which was Week 12, looking forward, we will look at other factors causing or resulting in social change.